Hi all, happy Monday. Welcome to the Wife of Caesar. My name is Michel or Michel, either's fine. As you know, the Wife of Caesar is Striner's project to talk about corruption or anti-corruption using everyday words so we can fight corruption in our day-to-day lives with a little bit more than just good intentions. In every show, we have a piece of news, a case, and a typology. Today's piece of news has to deal with Ecuador. And as you know, or you might know, Ecuador is the state-owned hydrocarbons or oil entity in Ecuador. And well, as you might know, this means that it is a commercial company, but it is wholly owned by the government. So any profits that come from the company go straight to the government. And this is tricky, or it's important because it makes every employee in that company automatically into a public official. So any improper payments that they receive are in fact bribes and illegal. Cool. Now, in the news, it came out that Mr. Armengol Alfonso Cevallos, a Latin American business person in Miami, or a businessman in Miami, entered into a guilty plea agreement with the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice is the state attorney in the United States. Now, a guilty plea or a guilty plea agreement is essentially when a defendant, a person accused of a crime, appears before a judge and before the government authorities and says, you know what, I actually did it, and sort of maybe confesses. He or she will admit that they committed the crime under particular conditions. So this person might appear before a court and say, I did commit a crime, and then in turn, the prosecution, the state's attorney, might recommend to the judge to issue a more lenient, a softer sentence. So you plead guilty in exchange for a lighter sentence. And this saves time and money for everyone. Now, he pled guilty to two crimes. The crimes that he's being accused of are crimes of conspiracy. And as you might know, conspiracy means that two or more people get together to do a crime or to plan a crime. And the crimes that he's being charged with are money laundering and bribery. You might remember that money laundering is taking money that stems from crimes, ill-gotten money, and passing it off or trying to pass it off as clean money, hence the term laundering. Let's talk a little bit about the facts. Between 2012 and 2015, Cevallos allegedly, well, not allegedly because he admitted to it, Cevallos paid around $4.4 million US in bribes to public officials. And these public officials were, as I mentioned before, simply employees of Ecuador. That means that just by virtue of working for the company, you become a public official, a government employee. And Cevallos paid these bribes in exchange for contracts. It doesn't stop there. He also committed money laundering or conspired to commit money laundering along with these public officials. And what happened there was that he not only paid the bribes for the Ecuador public officials, but he helped these officials hide those assets, hide that money. And he did so by setting up shell companies, which we've discussed. These are empty companies or paper companies that don't really do anything, but they only serve to shield the owners of the companies from liability and from their names appearing on documents. Now, he also, using these shell companies, he set up bank accounts for these people in US banks, and he helped them acquire properties. Properties, essentially houses and condos in Miami, wherein the officials were the effective beneficiaries. That an effective beneficiary is a fancy way of saying the person who really owns something, the person who really controls something. So we've talked about straw man or straw people, the people who lend you their names so that you can do bad deeds. Well, the other side of that coin are effective beneficiaries, the person who borrows the name. As soon as this news came to light, Ecuador spokespeople came out and declared to the press that, they reached out to the office of the legal counsel of Ecuador. So essentially the office that functions as the attorneys for the government that work and defend the government of Ecuador. And through that office, they reached out to the Department of Justice to ask or request that Ecuador be recognized as a victim in this case. Now, this is actually kind of a stretch, and it's not, let's say it's unorthodox. And what happens here is they are claiming that the actions of Cevallos and of the other public officials hurt them, hurt them financially, and thus they should be recognized as victims. But what's really going on here is that they're trying to avoid liability. And you might remember, or you might know, as everyone who works in anti-corruption knows, whenever an employee of a company commits a crime within the scope of her employment, so essentially doing her job, and that crime essentially becomes committed by the company, then the company itself can be charged for that crime. And what Petroecuador is trying to do here is avoid prosecution in the United States by the Department of Justice. It is very unlikely that they will be recognized as a victim because of the extent and the amount of the bribes that were paid. But of course, we will have to wait and see. Okay, let's move on to the case. As you know, Transparency International turned 25 in 2019, and to commemorate that event, they released a list of the 25 most iconic cases in corruption the world over. We are doing our own little rundown of that list, and today we reached the final case, and it is the case of Andrej Babis. Now, Andrej Babis is a man from Chequia, and he is the firstly, you might know Chequia as the Czech Republic. Either is fine. And Mr. Babis is the Prime Minister of Chequia. He is a businessman in that country, and he happens to be the second richest man of the country, which will become relevant in a minute. Now, in 2019, a company known as Agrofert received subsidies from the European Commission for around 17 million euro. However, it later came to light that this company is controlled by Babis because of an investigation carried out by the Czech chapter of Transparency International. See, what happens is in Czechia, companies are not legally obligated to reveal who controls them, who ultimately controls them. So essentially, who is their effective beneficiary, right? So it was pretty well hidden from light that Agrofert was controlled by Babis. However, in Slovakia, this is not the case, and companies are obligated to disclose. And because of paperwork and legal processes that Agrofert was carrying out in Slovakia, they disclosed that Babis was the person actually controlling the company. What happened there was that the company was owned by two trusts. Now, these trusts, a trust is just a contract that says, I'll do something for you. You give me assets, money, property, and I'll use that property in the way that you tell me. Now, these two trusts owned Agrofert. However, the trusts in turn were controlled by Babis. Now, this whole thing was not disclosed in Czechia, but it was disclosed in Slovakia. And again, Transparency International's chapter in Chequia picked up the story, did some research, found this out, and they filed an official complaint with the European Commission. As a result, two things happened. People in Chequia took to the streets in protest and demanded that Babis resign. And the European Commission looked into these operations by Agrofert and ruled that Agrofert had to refund the 17 million euro to the European Commission. So it is a victory of sorts. Now, this is important because not so much because of the money, it's a lot of money, but not at that scale, but because of the egregiousness of Babis. He was the prime minister, and he just didn't care that the conflict of interest was evident and so palpable, and he did it anyway. So this is why that was relevant. Now, it bears mentioning that Babis is still prime minister in Czechia. Let's move on to the typology. And today we have a money laundering typology. We will talk about overpricing and underpricing. Coolio. Now, let's say that we have a company A, and a different company B. Before that, money laundering is taking dirty money and passing it off as clean money. Now, one of the hardest parts of money laundering is the actual transfer of the assets, of the money. Handing people duffel bags filled with cash is not quite as glamorous as you might have seen it in movies. It's actually quite burdensome, and it's very much a risk. And very obviously, you can't use the financial system to just transfer money, or at least it's risky. So we are people who engage in money laundering are generally preoccupied with the transferring part, the transferring of value. Now, again, let's go back to our companies. We have company A and company B, and they coexist in the market. Now, company A sells, say, products or services, doesn't matter. And they tend to do so at what we call market price, which is, just what things go for. How much does one thing cost in the market, and the general price by other competitors. So that's market price, whatever things cost in the market or cost today. Now, let's say that company A wants to transfer value to company B to launder money because they are bad people. What company A will then do is to underprice, so sell below the market price. And in doing that, company B receives a product that is worth this much for a price that is comparable to this. So essentially, it is in essence transferring value. However, let's say that it's the other way around. Let's say that company B is the one who's going to be doing the transferring of value to company A. Then what we would do is that company A will sell its products above market price, so more expensive than what the market dictates or than what the market is willing to pay. Company B then pays the price, and even though it receives goods for this value, it is paying this much, and this difference is the value that company A receives. It's actually quite clever if you think about it, because it's really hard to keep track of what market value really is, because for one thing, you can't tell companies how to price their products or services, or at least in free market economies, you can't do it. And benchmarking, which is just a way of saying comparing prices, can only give you indicia into how the market works or how much something is worth. However, you can pay for something however much you want, or you can sell something for however much the market is willing to pay. So it's really hard for governments to keep track of what market price is. And obviously it's very hard to say, well, you're overpricing this because who are you to tell me that my product is not worth this much? Some governments have implemented different rules. So say in some countries, if you go 12 to 15% above or below market price, then something is suspicious and that might trigger an investigation. But again, these are just indicia or hints as to something that might be going might be done wrong, but they are not conclusive evidence in and of itself. So this is a really hard typology, or it's very hard to investigate and find that somebody is laundering money by over or underpricing. So that is it for today. Thank you for having us this week. As always, I will remind you to please blow the whistle. Every act of corruption should be denounced, but please do so safely. If you're not sure whether or not what you're looking at is corruption, or you're not entirely sure that your safety is guaranteed, don't do anything. Please refrain from acting and reach out to people who might help you. Feel free to reach out to us at info@striner.mx. We will be glad to help you, but above all, please stay safe. This was The Wife of Caesar. My name is Michele Bien, or Michele Bien. Either's fine. And you have a happy New Year.